The palace shimmered under the cold light of twin suns, its towers twisting impossibly toward the violet sky like crystalline fingers grasping for the heavens. In this city of alien precision, where every surface pulsed faintly with energy and every corridor hummed with machinery, humans were little more than shadows. Among those shadows moved Jaren, a janitor whose presence went unnoticed by the towering figures of the alien court. His hands, calloused and precise, scrubbed the marble floors with a diligence born not of fear but of quiet curiosity. He had learned to navigate the palace's labyrinthine halls with the ease of someone who had memorized each corner, each hidden passage where no alien eyes wandered. Jaren paused at the base of a sweeping stairway, the polished metal reflecting his worn uniform. He observed the bustling servants and attendants as they moved about their duties, their elongated limbs and iridescent skin a constant reminder of the hierarchy that placed him at the very bottom. No one spoke to him beyond the occasional command. His opinions, his knowledge, even his cleverness were irrelevant. And yet, despite the invisibility imposed upon him, Jaren felt a fascination with this world. He watched how the aliens' movements were precise, almost ritualistic, and how their society ran like a finely tuned machine, beautiful, efficient, and utterly blind to its own fragility. Above all, his thoughts lingered on the one figure who seemed untouchable even to the machinery of power, the alien queen's daughter. She was never seen in the court, shielded from sight, wrapped in layers of veils and technology that seemed to hum around her. Rumors among the staff whispered of her blindness, though none dared speak them aloud near the queen. Jaren, of course, had heard the whispers, his human ears picking up the stories the aliens thought no one could hear. Something about the child intrigued him, a mixture of mystery and defiance that even the queen's iron will could not fully contain. There was a sense that she perceived the world differently, though no one could say how. The janitor's routine was simple: sweep, polish, repair. And yet, he carried a silent habit of observation, cataloging oddities that no alien seemed to notice. A panel that flickered briefly, a faint hum out of place, a shadow that lingered longer than it should, small details that made the palace feel alive in ways the rulers would never admit. Today, as he polished the railings near the grand observation deck, he caught a glimpse of a soft movement behind a translucent curtain. A child's presence, slight and careful, barely brushing against the air. His pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the recognition of curiosity shared across species. This was the queen's daughter. The child's hand hovered above a console that glimmered with light. Though blind, she moved with certainty, guided by something invisible yet precise. Jaren felt a pang of respect for her skill, the same respect he had long reserved for the subtle patterns of alien engineering. His instinct was to step back, to maintain the boundary that the court demanded. But a deeper part of him wanted to understand, to see the world through her eyes, or at least through her perception of it. A sudden voice snapped him back to reality. "Jaren." It was sharp, demanding, the kind of command that left no room for hesitation. The queen herself appeared at the end of the hall, her presence filling the space with authority and danger. Her eyes, multifaceted and glinting like polished gemstones, swept over him with the precision of a predator. "Why do you linger near her chamber?" Jaren bowed low, his voice steady despite the tightening in his chest. "I was tending the lights, Your Majesty." The sensors reported a fluctuation. Enough," the queen interrupted, her tone final. She stepped closer, and Jaren noticed the subtle hum of energy that seemed to surround her, a visible aura of command that few dared approach. "Do not presume to watch her. You know the rules. Humans are to maintain the palace, not interfere with the life of the royal child." He straightened, swallowing the impulse to argue. The queen's daughter, however, seemed unaware, or perhaps unconcerned. Her fingers traced the console with the same confidence, guided by something that Jaren could not yet name. A shiver ran through him. There was intelligence here, but it was not merely what the sensors reported. It was perception, something innate, something uniquely human in its subtlety of observation. The queen's gaze hardened. "Leave immediately, and do not return without explicit orders." Jaren bowed again, retreating down the hall, Yet his mind did not turn to the next cleaning task. He walked slowly, each step heavy with questions that refused to settle. Why had she been shielded so completely? Why had the court failed to recognize the skill he had glimpsed? And, most pressing of all, what was it that the child could perceive that no one else had yet seen? Even as he pushed the doors open to the courtyard and felt the alien wind brush against his face, he knew he would return. Not as a servant, not as a janitor, but as an observer. There was something in the Queen's daughter that transcended the rules, a hidden current that drew him forward. And somewhere in the palace, unseen by everyone else, the first ripple of an unlikely alliance had already begun. The sun dipped lower over the city, painting the towers in fiery orange, and Jaren allowed himself a small, determined smile. He had been dismissed, yes, but the dismissal only confirmed that he had seen something worth seeing, something worth understanding. Whatever the palace expected him to be, he would find a way to be more. And in that resolve, the quiet hum of possibility echoed louder than any machinery, hinting that the story of the janitor and the blind child was only beginning. Jaren returned the next evening, not as a servant, but as a shadow weaving through the corridors he knew better than anyone else. The palace lights were dimmed for the child's evening rest, leaving the hallways cloaked in a faint, ethereal glow. Each step he took echoed softly against the polished floors, a rhythm that made him acutely aware of how completely alone he was, or at least, how alone he appeared. He paused near the observation deck, where he had first glimpsed the Queen's daughter, and his pulse quickened. There she was again, a silhouette outlined against the muted panels, her fingers brushing across the consoles as though reading some invisible script. He hesitated, the memory of the Queen's harsh command still fresh in his mind. Yet curiosity outweighed caution. There was something in the way she moved, so deliberate, so precise, that no human, or alien, could ignore. Jaren's hand hovered near the maintenance toolkit at his belt, not out of fear, but readiness. He had learned long ago that observing without preparation was reckless. A faint flicker of light, one of the panels reacting to the child's touch, betrayed her position. Instinctively, Jaren raised his lantern to illuminate the subtle movement, not realizing that even the smallest beam could pierce the shadowy space she navigated. The glow washed over her, revealing the contours of her face for the first time. Soft, delicate, unthreatening, yet strangely commanding in its stillness. She did not flinch, did not startle, but her head tilted slightly toward the light, as though acknowledging it in a way that only she could perceive. The reaction was instantaneous and severe. From the shadowed archway, the Queen's voice rang out, a razor cutting through the calm. "What have you done?" The force of her tone made Jaren stumble back, the lantern shaking in his grip. Before he could respond, she appeared, her presence as inescapable as gravity, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the light of the room in fractured patterns. "You have shone a light on her," the Queen accused, her voice trembling between fury and disbelief. "Do you not understand what this means? Do you not respect the rules I have set?" Jaren bowed low, but not out of submission. His bow was measured, deliberate, the posture of someone unafraid of consequences but aware of them. "I did not intend disrespect, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his chest. "I only wish to ensure the safety of the child." The light, it revealed nothing but the truth of the room. The Queen's expression hardened, and for a moment, the child herself shifted slightly, her small fingers brushing a console as if sensing the tension. "Truth," the Queen echoed, the word a whip. "You presume to know truth where humans are blind to our ways. You presume to touch what is not yours." Now, Jaren hesitated, his gaze flicking to the child. There was no fear in her eyes, if one could call them eyes. Instead, a faint spark of recognition, perhaps even trust, passed between them. It was fleeting, a fraction of a moment, but enough to root him to the spot. The Queen stepped forward, her aura of authority radiating pressure that pressed on him from all sides. "I warned you," she said softly, the fury in her voice contained by the chill of command. "Do you wish to test my patience further?" Swallowing, Jaren straightened. "I only wish to—" He stopped. Words failed to capture the sudden awareness striking him. The child's senses were sharper than he had imagined. She did not need sight to navigate the room. She read vibrations, subtle shifts in energy, the faintest hum of the palace machinery. The light had not blinded her. It had illuminated something even more profound, something that no one else could perceive. The queen's voice cut through his reverie again. "You are dismissed. Immediately. Do not return without my express permission." Jaren nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere. He left the hall with a measured pace, the lantern swinging gently at his side, each step echoing in the still night. Outside, the twin suns had dipped lower, casting the city in a palette of violet and gold, but his eyes were not on the horizon, they were on the puzzle that had just revealed itself in the child's room. He found a quiet alcove near the service gates, a place where no alien gaze could follow, and allowed himself a moment to think. The child's abilities were remarkable, unprecedented. She navigated the world in ways even the most sophisticated alien sensors could not detect. The queen had feared exposure, feared that someone might understand what she could not, or perhaps feared what others would do if they realized her daughter's potential. And Jaren, he had caught a glimpse. Just a glimpse. He realized that his next steps would require caution, ingenuity, and patience. Observing the child was no longer mere curiosity, it had become responsibility. Humans were undervalued in this society, dismissed as incapable, but he knew that his species had a subtle power, a talent for perception, for noticing what others overlooked. If anyone could understand the child, it was him. Yet the danger was real. If the queen discovered his intent to return, his life, and perhaps the fragile trust he had glimpsed in the child's brief acknowledgement, would be forfeit. And still, as he watched the palace silhouette against the fading sunlight, a sense of resolve settled over him. He would return, but differently. He would not act recklessly again. He would watch, learn, and wait for the moment when understanding could be transformed into action. For the first time, Jaren felt the stirrings of purpose beyond the routine of cleaning floors and repairing panels. Something in the child had awakened his human instinct to notice, to interpret, to act where others could not. That instinct, dismissed in his day-to-day life, now pulsed with urgent relevance. The palace, for all its alien splendor and rigid order, had overlooked the one human ability that mattered most: insight born of observation, patience, and courage. As night deepened, he disappeared into the service corridors, leaving the palace quiet once more, but carrying with him the weight of the knowledge he had glimpsed. The queen believed she had dismissed him. She had not. He had seen what no one else had, and that knowledge would shape everything to come. The hum of machinery followed him, steady and relentless, as if echoing the pulse of a secret the palace itself could not contain. Somewhere within its walls, the child continued her silent exploration of a world she alone could sense. And Jaren, unseen but no longer invisible, knew that the boundaries imposed by authority could not contain what he had already witnessed. The story was beginning, though neither the queen nor her court could yet comprehend it. Jaren did not sleep that night. Rest seemed unnecessary when every thought was occupied by the image of the child navigating her chamber with such precise assurance, entirely blind yet undeniably aware. He reviewed every detail he had seen, the way her fingers hovered above controls, the subtle shifts in her posture, the almost imperceptible hum that seemed to answer her presence. Humans were often underestimated in the alien hierarchy, but Jaren understood the value of observation, of noticing what others missed. If anyone could perceive the depth of the child's abilities, it was him. Before dawn, he returned to the palace under the guise of routine maintenance. He moved silently through corridors that now felt familiar in a way only someone who had memorized every crevice could navigate. Every shadow, every hum of machinery, was a guide. He paused near the observation deck, hiding behind a console, waiting. Patience was critical. The slightest misstep could bring the wrath of the queen down upon him. He had learned the lesson well. Visibility was danger, discretion was survival. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then, the soft presence of the child appeared, her small silhouette outlined against the faint glow of the panels. She moved deliberately, confidently, as if the world around her whispered its layout directly into her senses. Jaren watched her, marveling at how she oriented herself without sight. She did not need to glance at instruments or touch the surfaces in conventional ways. Instead, she read vibrations, gauged energy shifts, and interpreted the hum of the palace as effortlessly as one might read a familiar song. He adjusted the angle of his lantern, careful to keep the light diffuse and indirect, illuminating just enough to see the movements without startling her. The child paused briefly, her head tilting as if sensing him, not seeing but feeling. Jaren froze, heart quickening. A brief moment of acknowledgement passed between them, unspoken, unarticulated, yet laden with understanding. She was aware, but not threatened. It was the first sign of trust he had ever received in this alien palace. He noticed the subtle ways she interacted with the consoles. Her hands did not press buttons randomly, each movement followed a rhythm, an internal logic that mirrored the pulses of the palace systems themselves. Jaren realized that the child was not merely blind. She had developed an alternative method of perception, one so refined that even the most sophisticated alien sensors could not match it. Humans often excelled at noticing patterns, exploiting the overlooked details, skills dismissed as mundane or irrelevant by the court. And here, in her isolation, that skill had manifested naturally, amplified to extraordinary levels. Jaren made a mental note of every gesture, every shift in posture, every micro-reaction. He began to understand how she predicted the movement of energy through the palace's systems, how she could sense the subtle vibrations in the floors and walls. The queen's dismissal of him, the strict prohibitions, suddenly made sense. The child was an anomaly, and anomalies were dangerous to rigid systems. The queen feared discovery, feared the implications of the child's extraordinary abilities being recognized by anyone, alien or human. Hours passed, yet Jaren remained hidden, unwilling to leave even when exhaustion pressed against his bones. He began to experiment, gently creating subtle disturbances in the environment, tiny pulses of light, barely perceptible sounds, to gauge the child's reaction. She responded with precision every time, her movements adjusting instantaneously, revealing the extraordinary reach of her perception. Each test confirmed what he had begun to suspect. She was uniquely attuned to the palace, to its energy, to its rhythms, in ways no one else could perceive. Despite his caution, Jaren allowed a small measure of admiration to creep in. She was more than a puzzle to solve. She was a mind that could redefine everything humans had been told about their limitations. In her, he recognized a kindred sense of awareness, a reliance on perception and adaptation rather than brute strength or authority. He felt a surge of determination. If the court would not acknowledge her abilities, he would, and he would understand them fully. Yet the tension remained, a low hum beneath every observation. The queen had been clear: humans were not to interfere, not to observe, not to question. One misstep could end him, and yet, inaction seemed impossible. The child's extraordinary skill demanded recognition, and his own instincts, honed by years of navigating unnoticed in a world that dismissed him, compelled him forward. Each moment he spent watching, he catalogued, analyzed, and hypothesized, building a silent framework that he would need when the time came to act. He began to notice subtle inconsistencies in the palace's routines, shifts in energy that the queen's staff ignored or failed to perceive. These anomalies became the threads he followed, threads that led him closer to understanding the full extent of the child's abilities. Every flicker of light she navigated, every vibration she responded to, became data points in a mental map he constructed with meticulous care. It was a map that no alien, no advisor, no sensor could replicate, because it was born of human intuition and observation, skills undervalued in this society. The child paused, fingers hovering over a panel that pulsed faintly with energy, and for a moment, time seemed to contract. Jaren felt the pulse resonate through the floor, through the walls, and into his own chest, as if the palace itself were acknowledging their shared understanding. He realized, with a mixture of awe and apprehension, that this was more than mere perception. It was an ability that could shift the balance of power if recognized, if understood. As the child finally retreated, moving back toward the inner chambers, Jaren allowed himself a quiet exhale. He had observed enough for one night, yet the weight of what he had seen pressed heavily on him. The queen's rules, the hierarchy, the dismissals, all of it was a barrier not to protection, but to understanding. He knew now that he could not return as a mere janitor. He would have to think, to plan, to observe with precision, if he was to navigate the dangers of the court and uncover the full scope of the child's abilities. For the first time, he felt a spark of purpose beyond his daily routines. The child's perception, hidden and extraordinary, had revealed the possibility of something larger, a truth that no one else had seen, a power unrecognized, and a human ability to notice what others ignored. The night ended, but his mission had only begun. The palace, silent under the twin suns, seemed alive with potential, and Jaren, unseen but resolute, knew he was no longer merely a janitor. He was an observer, a witness, and perhaps, in time, a guide to a truth the queen could not yet comprehend. Jaren returned the following evening with a plan. Observation alone had revealed much, but he needed more than fleeting impressions. He needed proof of the child's extraordinary perception. He moved silently through the palace corridors, the familiar hum of machinery guiding him as though the building itself recognized his presence. Every step was deliberate, measured, a dance of discretion honed over months of unnoticed work. The child's chamber was his destination, but not yet confrontation. Tonight would be careful, calculated, a test of what he had glimpsed before. Peering through a narrow slit in the doorway, he watched her enter, her movements smooth, assured, her fingers trailing lightly over panels that hummed and pulsed beneath her touch. Each motion seemed almost musical, each pause deliberate, timed with the subtle vibration of the palace itself. Jaren marveled at her precision, realizing that she did not need sight to understand her environment. She read it as an invisible symphony, detecting patterns invisible to everyone else. The realization settled in his chest like a spark. She was not merely blind. She had discovered an alternate form of perception, one that surpassed what even the most advanced alien sensors could measure. He set the lantern down just out of sight, careful that no direct beam would reveal his presence. Then he began his experiment. He produced a small object, a simple orb of faintly glowing material, and placed it on a low platform near the doorway. The glow was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet Jaren wondered if the child could detect it through the vibrations it emitted, the minuscule shifts in energy it caused in the air. He retreated into the shadows and watched. As she passed by, her hand brushed the console, pausing as though sensing the orb before she reached it. A faint smile crossed his face. She had noticed it without sight, without touch, entirely through her perception of energy and movement. She lifted the orb, examined it with her fingers in a manner that suggested understanding beyond simple interaction, and returned it to the platform. Jaren's heart pounded. This was more than skill, it was intuition, honed to perfection by necessity and isolation. He introduced subtle variations in the room, tiny hums, barely audible shifts in light, minuscule changes in temperature. Each change elicited an immediate, precise response. She adapted without hesitation, almost as if the palace itself whispered guidance to her. He realized that her awareness extended far beyond what he had imagined. She could predict outcomes, sense anomalies, and respond with accuracy that even the court's most advanced monitoring systems could not achieve. The implications struck him with awe. The Queen's daughter was an untapped force, a mind capable of perceiving layers of reality invisible to others, yet dismissed by her own court as helpless because of her blindness. For the first time, he considered what the court's dismissal had cost them. Humans were routinely undervalued, their observations considered trivial. Yet here was proof that a human mind, keenly observant and adaptive, could recognize potential overlooked by the most powerful alien authorities. Jaren's pride, quiet and long suppressed, surged. He realized that his instincts, his patience, and his careful attention to detail, traits scorned by the aliens, were precisely what allowed him to see the truth. The child paused near a console that pulsed with energy, her fingers hovering above its surface. Jaren sensed a tension in the air, a subtle quiver in the energy flow that indicated a shift, a hidden mechanism that even the palace staff had not detected. He marveled at the synchronization between her awareness and the system itself. She moved with confidence, correcting a misalignment in the energy flow, stabilizing the room in a way that no sensor or advisor could replicate. It was not just perception, it was intervention, guided entirely by her intuition and understanding. Jaren knew that he could not remain merely an observer. The child's abilities were extraordinary, and yet she remained isolated, her talents unrecognized, her potential untapped. He resolved that he would find a way to communicate, to guide without imposing, to protect without revealing himself fully. But the risk was palpable. The Queen's vigilance was formidable, and any hint of interference could bring swift retribution. He continued his silent experiments, introducing subtle challenges and noting the child's responses. Each success confirmed his hypothesis. She could perceive, adapt, and manipulate her environment with a depth that no alien technology could measure. The realization filled him with both awe and urgency. This child, underestimated and shielded, represented not just potential, but power, latent, unrecognized, and dangerous in the eyes of the court. As he retreated for the night, Jaren paused in the shadows, watching her settle into her chamber. He felt a strange kinship, a silent acknowledgement that passed between observer and observed. She trusted him in a way the Queen and her advisors never had, if only because he had not interfered, yet. There was a rhythm to their connection, subtle but undeniable, built on understanding, respect, and mutual recognition. Outside, the twin suns were just beginning to dip beneath the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the city. Jaren felt the weight of the night's discoveries pressing upon him. He had confirmed her abilities, he had seen what no one else had seen. But he also knew that awareness alone was insufficient. Knowledge was powerless without action, and action in this palace came with consequences. The Queen's decree, her fury, and her unyielding control of the child remained an obstacle that could not be ignored. Still, a sense of purpose had taken root in Jaren. Observation had given him insight. Insight demanded strategy. He would return not as a mere janitor or shadow, but as an agent of understanding. The child's abilities were remarkable, yes, but they were also vulnerable, and vulnerability demanded protection. He understood, with a clarity that surprised him, that he could not remain passive. The palace had dismissed him once, but the truth he had uncovered could not be silenced. As he slipped into the quiet corridors, blending seamlessly with the machinery and shadows, Jaren allowed a single thought to take hold. The court, the Queen, and the palace itself had underestimated him, and the child. That underestimation was both a danger and an opportunity, a truth that would shape every decision he made in the days to come. The night ended, but the story of what he had discovered, and what he would do with it, was only beginning. Jaren did not anticipate being caught. His movements had been careful, methodical, honed over weeks of secret observation. Yet, as he crouched behind a support beam near the child's chamber, a sudden hum of energy, too deliberate to be incidental, froze him in place. The Queen's presence was unmistakable. She did not move as the guards did, nor did she approach with hesitation. She appeared as if materializing from the walls themselves, her multifaceted eyes scanning the room with a precision that left no corner unchecked. "You continue to defy me," she said, her voice a low, cutting vibration that seemed to reverberate through the walls themselves. Jaren straightened, the weight of her scrutiny pressing down on him. There was no room for excuses, no misstep would go unnoticed. He had been careful, but the Queen's perception, sharp and unyielding, had found him anyway. "I only observe, Your Majesty," he said, steady despite the tension that coiled in his chest. "I do not interfere. I only wish to understand her, your daughter." The Queen's eyes narrowed, facets glinting like shards of crystal. "You presume to understand what you cannot even begin to comprehend. Humans are not meant for insight into these matters. Your curiosity is dangerous. Do you know what is at stake?" "Yes," he replied. "I understand more than the court does. I see what no one else sees." His words hung in the air, daring, insolent, yet backed by truth. He could feel the weight of the Queen's judgment pressing against him, but he also knew that his observation had revealed something extraordinary, something undeniable. The child stirred, sensing tension, her fingers brushing lightly over a console. She did not speak, but her awareness of the presence of both Jaren and the Queen was palpable. Jaren realized that she trusted him in a way the Queen could never comprehend, and that trust emboldened him. His voice remained calm, measured. She has abilities that no one else recognizes. You hide her from the court, but they cannot measure her skill. I can. I understand it. The Queen's expression hardened, a flicker of disbelief flashing across her features. You speak of abilities? You presume to know what lies beyond your human perception. She stepped closer, the aura of authority around her radiating pressure. Explain. Jaren's eyes followed the child, who continued her subtle manipulations of the consoles, adjusting energy flows with precision. She reads the palace itself, he said. Not with sight, but with vibrations, energy shifts, and subtle patterns. She perceives and adapts instantly. No censor, no advisor, no member of the court can detect what she senses. I've seen it. I've observed her responses, her accuracy, her understanding of the systems around her. She is more aware than anyone in this palace. The Queen's multifaceted eyes shimmered with a complex mixture of skepticism and curiosity. And you are certain of this? That your human observations are correct? I am, Jaren said firmly. I've tested her. Subtle changes, variations in energy, small disturbances. You can see nothing, yet she responds with precision every time. She understands the palace in ways that none of you can. I can prove it. The Queen's lips pressed together, the faintest hum of energy pulsing through her aura. She hesitated, perhaps debating whether to punish him or listen. The tension was nearly unbearable. Jaren felt the child's awareness brush against him, a silent, unspoken understanding, and he realized that the bond of trust between them had become a silent shield. Very well, the Queen said at last, her tone icy yet tinged with a reluctant curiosity. If what you say is true, then demonstrate it. Show me what you claim to see. Jaren's heart quickened. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, though it came with immense risk. One mistake, one hesitation, and he would be cast from the palace permanently, or worse. He nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the moment, and moved subtly to the console the child had been adjusting. He created a minor fluctuation, an imperceptible variation in the energy flow that would destabilize the room ever so slightly. The Queen's posture shifted, the aura of authority now tinged with uncertainty. For the first time, the rigid control she exercised seemed to falter. The court's assumptions, the hierarchy that had governed her life and the palace's operation, were inadequate to contain what Jaren had demonstrated. And yet she remained cautious, protective, unwilling to relinquish her authority entirely. The child, sensing the tension, moved closer to Jaren, her hand brushing lightly against his arm in a gesture of silent trust. He understood immediately, whatever came next, they faced it together. The Queen's attention, once a suffocating force, now lingered on the undeniable evidence before her, her own perceptions challenged by a human she had long dismissed. You have seen what no one else has, the Queen said finally, her voice lower, softer, a reluctant acknowledgement of truth. Perhaps you understand more than I assumed. But know this, she added, her tone hardening once more, that any misstep, any interference beyond observation, will be punished without hesitation. Jaren bowed slightly, the weight of her warning acknowledged but not deterrent. I understand, Your Majesty. I only wish to protect her, to ensure her abilities are recognized before they are dismissed or overlooked. The Queen regarded him for a long moment, multifaceted eyes assessing, calculating. Finally, she turned, signaling the end of the confrontation. Very well. For now. But be warned. The palace is no place for human curiosity to roam unchecked. You are observed even when you believe yourself invisible. Jaren exhaled quietly as she departed, the room settling into silence once more. The child remained by his side, small and unassuming, yet radiating a quiet power that had already begun to shift the balance of understanding within the palace. He realized that the confrontation, while perilous, had yielded something vital, acknowledgement. The queen could no longer ignore the truth. The child's abilities and the human mind that recognized them had been validated. As he retreated into the shadows, Jaren's mind raced. Observation alone was no longer enough. Proof had been given, yet the palace still remained a cage, and the queen still a formidable obstacle. The path forward would require careful planning, precise action, and a measure of courage he had only begun to summon. The night ended, but the stakes had never been higher. The story of the janitor, the blind child, and the queen's reluctant recognition was only beginning, and the consequences of what had just transpired would ripple through the palace in ways none could yet foresee. The next day, the palace was alive with its usual rhythm, yet Jaren moved with a quiet purpose, knowing that the events of the previous night had shifted everything. The queen's acknowledgement lingered like a delicate thread in the air, fragile yet undeniable. He had seen the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the way she measured the child differently now, and he knew that proof, real, undeniable proof, was required if he was to secure not only her trust but any hope of protection for the extraordinary girl. He entered her chamber with practiced care, careful to make no sound that might alert the court. The child was already there, standing near the central console, her fingers tracing the surface in a rhythm that Jaren had come to recognize as both instinctive and methodical. She did not startle at his presence. She had come to understand that he observed without threat, and a quiet acknowledgement passed between them, unspoken but powerful. "I need to show her," Jaren murmured, not to the child but to himself. He retrieved a small device from his toolkit, one he had fashioned in secrecy. It was a simple mechanism, designed to emit subtle energy fluctuations, variations that would challenge the child's perception. Invisible to the court sensors, imperceptible to ordinary alien senses, yet detectable by her unique awareness. The child tilted her head, sensing his intent. She did not speak but stepped aside, her movements fluid and measured, granting him the space to arrange the test. Jaren set the device on the floor, activating it with a flick of his wrist. A soft pulse emanated outward, distorting the energy in the room in ways nearly imperceptible. The child paused, fingers hovering in midair. Then, almost imperceptibly, her hands shifted, correcting the imbalance before the pulse could propagate. Systems realigned, the hum of machinery stabilizing instantly. Jaren exhaled quietly, marveling at the precision. No human, or alien, could have responded with such immediacy and accuracy. He repeated the test, introducing slightly more complex variations, each time watching her adapt seamlessly. Each motion she made confirmed what he had long suspected. Her blindness was not a limitation, it was a gateway to a perception that surpassed conventional sight. The queen entered then, silent and deliberate, her presence unmistakable. She had come unannounced, observing from the shadows as Jaren conducted his experiment. The court's advisors had followed, their curiosity piqued, yet none dared speak or intervene. They, like the queen herself, were about to witness what humans and aliens alike had dismissed as impossible. "She perceives the palace itself," Jaren said, his voice calm but firm, addressing the queen directly. "Not with sight, but with awareness, intuition, and pattern recognition. Every fluctuation, every pulse, every subtle shift, it is visible to her in a way that no sensor, no advisor, can comprehend. I have tested it. I have observed it. And she responds with absolute precision." The queen's eyes, multifaceted and glimmering, focused on the child. The pulse of energy shifted slightly, and Jaren allowed her daughter's hands to adjust it once more. The room stabilized immediately. The court gasped, though silently, recognizing the extraordinary coordination they had witnessed. The queen's own expression shifted from disbelief to careful acknowledgement. "This is remarkable," the queen said, her voice quieter than before, almost hesitant. I had not realized the extent of her perception. Her gaze flickered to Jaren. "And you understood it? You, a human, perceived what we could not." "Yes, Your Majesty," Jaren replied, "because I observed carefully, patiently, and without assumption. I did not rely on what was said, what was expected, or what could be measured by conventional tools. I noticed what others ignored, and I saw her." The queen studied him, and in her expression was a mixture of awe, frustration, and reluctant respect. For the first time, the rigid authority she wielded seemed tempered by the undeniable truth before her. The child remained still, aware of the recognition and yet cautious, sensing the weight of the moment. She understood that the human before her had validated her abilities in a way the court could not deny. Jaren stepped closer, careful not to intrude, and spoke softly to the queen. "She is not a danger. She is extraordinary, yes, but she needs guidance, understanding, and protection. If left isolated, her abilities could be suppressed, misunderstood, or wasted. But with careful attention, she could surpass even what this court imagines." The queen's posture shifted, a subtle indication of concession. She was still protective, still wary, but the acknowledgement was unmistakable. "You speak truth," she said. "I have underestimated her, and I have underestimated you." Jaren nodded, sensing that the moment, though tense, had been pivotal. The queen had not embraced him fully, nor relinquished her authority entirely, but she had seen the evidence. The child's abilities and the human understanding that had revealed them were no longer a secret. Recognition had been achieved, and with it came the potential for trust, collaboration, and change within the palace hierarchy. He glanced at the child, whose expression was unreadable yet radiant in its own subtle way. She had known he would not betray her. She had known he would observe, not interfere. That trust had carried them through the demonstration, and it would be the foundation for whatever came next. The queen's advisors whispered among themselves, their skepticism tempered by undeniable proof. The court had witnessed what humans could achieve through careful observation, patience, and subtle intelligence. The HFY principle, the underestimated abilities of humans, had been validated not through confrontation but through insight, understanding, and measured action. As the queen turned to leave, signaling the conclusion of the test, Jaren allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The danger had been real, the consequences could have been severe. Yet he had succeeded. Proof had been established. The child's extraordinary abilities were now visible, undeniable, and respected, even if grudgingly. The child approached him, her hand brushing lightly against his arm in a gesture of acknowledgement. It was silent, unspoken, yet it carried more weight than any words could convey. They had established a connection, one built on trust, understanding, and mutual recognition. The palace, with all its machinery, hierarchy, and rigid authority, could no longer ignore the truth that humans, and this child, had revealed. Jaren retreated from the chamber as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the palace corridors. He knew the story was far from over. Recognition had been achieved, but respect, protection, and understanding required ongoing vigilance, strategy, and careful planning. Yet for the first time, he felt that the tide had turned. He had seen what no one else could, and now, the palace had to acknowledge it. As the twin suns vanished behind the horizon, Jaren allowed a faint smile. The night was quiet, but possibilities hummed in the air, electric and alive. They had proven their truth, and the next steps, though uncertain, would be guided by insight, vigilance, and human ingenuity. The story of the janitor and the blind child had reached a turning point, and the consequences of what had been revealed would ripple through the palace in ways no one could yet predict. The following days unfolded with a strange, cautious rhythm. The palace had not erupted into chaos, nor had the queen sought to punish Jaren. Instead, an unspoken acknowledgement hung in the corridors. He was no longer invisible. The court whispered behind closed doors, sensing a shift they could not articulate, while Jaren moved through the halls with quiet purpose, careful to respect the boundaries still imposed by the queen. Yet he felt a new sense of agency, a weight lifted by the knowledge that he had been seen and, in a way, trusted. The child greeted him each day with the same calm awareness that had drawn him to her in the first place. She did not need words. Her presence was enough. Jaren had begun leaving small, subtle tools near her console, devices calibrated to gently test her perception, challenges she met with grace and precision. Each success reinforced the quiet understanding between them, the bond of shared knowledge and mutual recognition. She was no longer merely an observer of the palace. She was its subtle orchestrator, moving in harmony with systems no one else comprehended. One afternoon, the queen summoned him. He approached her chamber with measured steps, heart steady but aware of the delicate balance of power. She was seated upon a raised platform, her multifaceted eyes glinting as she regarded him. "You have proven yourself," she said simply, a statement heavier than any command. "Perhaps humans possess qualities I have long underestimated. Observation, patience, understanding, these are not traits I see often in our kind. Yet you have demonstrated them." Jaren inclined his head, acknowledging her recognition without overstepping. "I only seek to understand what is hidden, Your Majesty, to see what others do not, and to protect it from being overlooked or suppressed." The queen's gaze flickered to her daughter, who stood nearby, fingers brushing lightly across a console. "You see, child, he has observed you without interfering, has understood your abilities where even I have failed. There is merit in what he brings, though I will not relinquish my caution." Her tone softened slightly, a subtle concession. "You may continue your observation, but know that this palace is no place for recklessness. Trust must be earned, even when it is given." The child's small hand lifted, brushing against Jaren's arm in the quietest of acknowledgments. He understood it perfectly. She trusted him, relied on his guidance, and recognized that he had become more than a mere janitor. Their connection was subtle, unspoken, yet undeniable. In the days that followed, Jaren's presence became normalized. He no longer hid in shadows. His observation was deliberate, controlled, a measured influence that the queen allowed but watched closely. The child's abilities flourished, and Jaren began documenting patterns, anomalies, and subtle behaviors, creating a framework that might one day allow her skills to be applied in ways the court could never anticipate. He noticed how the queen observed him as much as he observed her posture softening in subtle ways, a gradual acknowledgement that humans, when patient and perceptive, could contribute meaningfully to the order she maintained. Yet there were moments of tension. Advisors whispered behind screens, warning of unpredictability and potential risk. The queen herself remained cautious, her authority tempered but not abandoned. Jaren understood that respect was fragile, earned not only through observation but through consistent, careful action. Each day became a negotiation of subtle power, where knowledge, insight, and discretion mattered more than strength or status. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, Jaren found himself alone with the child in the observation chamber. He watched her hands trace the panels, correcting subtle energy imbalances with an instinctive grace that still amazed him. "You are extraordinary," he said softly, not needing words beyond acknowledgement. "And yet, you trust me to see what others cannot." Her small head tilted, fingers pausing for a heartbeat before continuing. There was no need for speech. The understanding was mutual. She sensed his intention, recognized his observation as protective, not invasive. In that quiet moment, Jaren realized that his role had shifted. He was no longer merely an observer of her abilities. He was a guardian, a silent guide, the bridge between her extraordinary perception and a court that might one day recognize it. The queen entered then, not with fury or suspicion, but with measured authority, her eyes flicking between them. "I have reconsidered," she said. "You, human, have demonstrated the ability to perceive what others overlook. You are valuable. Continue your work, but remember this: the palace demands vigilance, restraint, and respect. None of us are exempt from these rules, not even you." Jaren inclined his head, understanding the gravity of her words. Recognition had been granted, yes, but responsibility followed closely behind. He was trusted, yes, but under careful scrutiny. Yet for the first time, he felt the equilibrium shifting. Humans, often dismissed and overlooked, could influence the palace through perception, intelligence, and patience. They could observe, interpret, and act in ways that surpassed brute strength or inherited authority. As the queen departed, the child's hand brushed once more against his arm. Jaren felt the weight of possibility settle over him. The palace, with all its machinery, hierarchy, and rigid tradition, was beginning to acknowledge what humans could achieve when underestimated. He understood that the bond between him and the child was both a shield and a key, a means of protecting her abilities while subtly reshaping the palace's understanding of value and insight. The twin suns set fully, leaving the city in a wash of violet and gold. Jaren stood quietly, watching the palace hum with life. He had been dismissed once, almost punished, and yet he had proven his worth through careful observation, patience, and understanding. The child's extraordinary perception had been validated, and the queen's cautious respect now extended to him as well. In that quiet moment, Jaren allowed himself a small, determined smile. The court, the queen, and even the palace itself could no longer ignore what he had seen. Humans had demonstrated what the aliens had overlooked: the power of perception, patience, and insight. The story was far from finished, but the balance had begun to shift. The child's abilities were nurtured, his role recognized, and the palace would never view them, or humans, in the same way again. For the first time, Jaren felt a quiet certainty. Observation had led to understanding, understanding to recognition, and recognition to possibility. The palace remained a place of hierarchy and caution, yes, but now human ingenuity and perception had earned a place within it, subtle but undeniable. The night settled over the city, humming with potential, and Jaren knew that this fragile balance, carefully built, carefully observed, was only the beginning. The palace, now calm under the twin suns' fading light, held a different energy than it had when Jaren first walked its halls. Shadows no longer represented danger or invisibility, they were markers of subtle vigilance, quiet observation that flowed in harmony with the palace's hum. He moved among the corridors with assurance, the weight of authority tempered by the understanding he had earned. The queen's daughter had grown in confidence, her extraordinary perception honed under his careful watch, and the palace itself seemed to recognize the new equilibrium. The child sat at her console, fingertips gliding across panels with a grace that belied her blindness. Energy pulses responded to her presence like the notes of a perfectly tuned instrument. Jaren observed her silently, noting the precision of her motions, the confidence that had flourished since the court had acknowledged her abilities. She glanced toward him, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them, a shared understanding born of trust, patience, and countless hours of careful observation. The queen entered, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the soft glow of the console. She paused, watching the child with something akin to quiet pride. "She has adapted remarkably," she said, voice measured, tinged with a softness that had rarely touched her words before. "And you, human, have guided her without overstepping. That is no small feat in this palace." Jaren inclined his head respectfully. "I have observed, Your Majesty. I have guided subtly, not imposed. Her abilities are extraordinary, but they require patience, understanding, and careful attention. She must not be rushed or forced into recognition by the court. She must learn, adapt, and grow." The queen regarded him, a flicker of something human in her expression that even the court could not usually discern. "You have changed the way I perceive not only my daughter but the role of humans within this palace. I see now that insight does not come solely from authority or inherited power. It comes from understanding, observation, and patience. Qualities humans often possess but are too rarely acknowledged." The child adjusted the console, stabilizing the energy flow with perfect precision. Jaren noted the subtle efficiency of her movements, the ease with which she manipulated the palace's systems without conventional sight. "She is extraordinary," he said softly, "and she is capable of more than anyone has realized. But she needs protection, guidance, and recognition on her terms, not ours." The queen nodded, a quiet concession. "I understand, and I acknowledge the wisdom in your approach." Her eyes flickered toward him with a measured intensity, signaling trust, yet still holding the weight of authority. "You are no longer merely a janitor, human. You are an observer, a guide, and in your own way, a protector. Do not forget this, for the palace watches as carefully as you do." Jaren allowed himself a faint smile, a mixture of relief and determination. The journey had been perilous, each step fraught with potential danger, yet the risks had led to understanding, recognition, and, most importantly, the protection of the child's abilities. The palace hierarchy had shifted subtly but irreversibly. Humans, often dismissed, had proven that perception, patience, and insight could influence even the most rigid systems. The child stood and approached him, small yet radiant in her quiet confidence. She did not speak, but her hand brushed against his arm in acknowledgement and trust. Jaren felt the weight of responsibility settle over him once more. He was no longer invisible, no longer merely a janitor performing unseen tasks. He was a participant in shaping the palace's future, a silent guide to a mind that could transform what the court had long underestimated. Outside, the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a spectrum of violet and gold. Jaren paused, observing the palace in its entirety, noting the subtle hum of energy, the precision of movement, and the invisible currents of influence now flowing differently through its halls. Everything had changed. The child's abilities had been validated, his role recognized, and the queen's perception altered. The palace itself, for all its machinery and hierarchy, had begun to acknowledge what humans could achieve when underestimated. The queen spoke again, her voice quieter now, almost reflective. "You have shown me that understanding is more than instruction, that observation is more than oversight. And you, human, have reminded me that the world is larger than my expectations." Jaren bowed lightly, absorbing her words. "I only observed, Your Majesty. And I only sought to ensure that she could see, and be seen, in her own way." The child returned to her console, her hands moving with the effortless precision that had come to define her. Jaren watched her, knowing that the future held limitless potential. The palace would continue its routines, the court would whisper, and the queen would govern with careful authority. But now there existed an invisible current, a recognition of human ingenuity and the extraordinary capacity of one child who could perceive what no one else could. For the first time, Jaren felt a quiet certainty. Observation, patience, and understanding had transformed his role, validated the child's abilities, and altered the court's perception. The palace, once an unyielding machine of hierarchy and rigidity, now contained a spark of possibility, a space where the underestimated could be recognized, and insight could reshape even the most formidable systems. As the last rays of the twin suns disappeared, Jaren allowed a subtle smile to cross his face. The story of the janitor, the blind child, and the queen's cautious acknowledgement had reached a turning point. The palace would never be the same. Humans had proven their value, observation had proven its power, and a child's extraordinary perception had rewritten the rules of what could be seen, understood, and achieved. The city settled into night, humming with life, machinery, and possibility. Jaren moved quietly through the corridors, no longer invisible but acutely aware of the delicate balance he now maintained. The child's abilities were safe, acknowledged, and nurtured. The queen had recognized truth beyond authority. And in the quiet of the palace, beneath the ever-present hum of energy and shadow, Jaren knew that the underestimated could achieve greatness when observation, insight, and patience were allowed to flourish. The palace remained vast, its systems complex, and its hierarchy intact, but the course of what lay ahead had shifted. Humans, often dismissed, now had a place in that course. The child, once hidden, was now a force to be understood, guided, and protected. And Jaren, the janitor who had once swept floors unnoticed, had proven that perception, patience, and courage could change everything. For the first time in the long, humming corridors of the palace, the future felt open, alive, and full of potential.